Welcome to Male Revenge, a place for the fathers and grandfathers the world chose to overlook. Men who were lied to, cast aside, and counted as finished. But the good book gives us a promise. Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. We do not trade in hatred here. We wait on the justice of a God who sees every hidden thing and forgets none of his own. Listen now to a man who learned that for himself. My name is Arthur Bennett. For 40 years, the great concert halls of the world fell silent the moment I sat down at the piano, and they did not breathe again until I lifted my hands from the keys. Tonight, in a glass office high above the city that once spoke my name like a prayer, my own daughter-in-law reached across a polished table, patted the back of my hand the way you pat a tired old dog, and explained to a room full of strangers that poor Arthur simply was not himself anymore. She said it so kindly. That was the cruelty of it. She told the lawyer, the two witnesses, and the notary that grief had taken my mind, that I could no longer be trusted with my own affairs, and that it was a blessing the family had stepped in before I gave it all away. Then she slid a document across the table with a pen laid neatly on top and asked me to sign over everything I had ever earned. The house, the savings, $3.6 million. A whole life spent at the keys, and every soul in that room looked at me the way you look at a man who is already 3/4 gone. My son Tom sat at the far end of that table and studied the grain of the wood as though it held some great secret. He did not say a single word in my defense. He had not looked me in the eye in 2 months. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. A younger man might have. But I had spent the long gray hours of that morning sitting in my late wife's church, in the empty pew where Clara had sat every Sunday of her life, reading the verse she had underlined in her Bible until it was burned into me. Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Clara had believed that with her whole heart. Sitting there with my hand trapped beneath Sloane's, I told myself I would try. Leave it to him, Arthur. I could almost hear her say, but God forgive me, I was not certain I could. Here is the part none of them knew. While Sloane explained to the room that the old fool had finally lost his grip, the old fool was the only one at that table who understood what was coming. My wife had not died as helpless as they all believed. Clara had left something behind. And my granddaughter, 4 years old, with a smear of jelly on her chin and a song that no one living had taught her, had already pressed the key into my hand, though neither of us yet knew what it would open. But to understand how a man who once played for presidents ended up at that table, pitied and patted and robbed, you have to go back 3 years, to the morning the music in me died. Clara and I had been married for 31 years. I made the music, she made the life. She kept the books, paid the taxes, read every contract twice. And on Sundays, she sat in the third pew of the little Methodist church on Cedar Street, while I stayed home with my coffee and my scales. One of us has to talk to the Lord, Arthur, she would say, kissing the top of my head on her way out, since the other one only ever talks to that piano. I always laughed. I always believed we had time. The cancer took her in the fall, on a gray morning, with her hand in mine. And when she was gone, the music went with her. I do not mean that as a turn of phrase. The thing that had lived in my chest since I was a boy, the thing that turned sorrow into sound, simply went quiet. I closed the lid over the keys. I draped a white sheet over the piano the way you cover a face. And for 3 years, I did not play a single note. Grief makes a man careless. Worse, it makes him blind. All the paperwork Clara had carried so easily landed on my plate, and I could not bear to look at it, for her handwriting still lived in the margins. So when a page appeared in front of me, I signed it. I did not read it. What does it matter, I told myself, on 100 gray mornings? What does any of it matter now? I understand at last what I was really doing. I was a man who walked to his own front door, turned the lock to the open position, and climbed the stairs to bed. My son had married again the year after we buried his mother. Her name was Sloane, and she came into our grief like a nurse into a sick room. Gentle and competent and always smiling. In those months I was grateful for her, the way a drowning man is grateful for any hand. My old friend Saul, my lawyer of 30 years, met her once and said almost nothing. Later he told me that the widest smile can hide the coldest heart. I told him he was a suspicious old goat. I should have listened. A wolf does not knock at the door. It wears the coat of the lamb and waits for you to open it yourself. So I let her bring me coffee and sit with me through the long evenings and handle things, as Tom liked to say. One night she leaned in close and told me, in that warm, honey voice, that a man my age ought to put his affairs in order, and that she knew a wonderful lawyer who could make it all simple. "Let me take care of you, Arthur," she said. And the saddest part, the part I will carry to my own grave, is that I let her. I handed a wolf the keys to my house and thanked her, while the only 2 souls who could save me, a dead woman and a living child, waited in the wings for an old fool to wake up. 3 years is a long time to live in a house and keep your eyes on the floor. Every morning I came down the stairs of my son's home and turned my face from the living room, because the living room held a grand piano under a white sheet. And there is no sight on God's earth that looks more like a coffin than a covered piano in an empty room. It had been Clara's idea to keep it draped. She said the dust would ruin the soundboard. She did not live to learn that dust was the least of what would ruin it. That was the shape of my days. Black coffee at the kitchen table. The newspaper I did not read. The wide and terrible quiet of a house where the music had stopped. I had not touched the piano, and I had not gone back to church either. Clara had spent every Sunday of her life in that third pew, and I had not said a single word to her God since the morning we lowered her into the ground. I had nothing left to say to him that was not an accusation. My son came down late, the way he did now, his tie crooked, his eyes ringed in gray. There had been a time when Tom laughed easily. That man was gone too. I asked him how the business was holding. "It's fine, Dad," he said, to the coffee pot, not to me. But I had raised that boy, and I knew the sound of a lie wearing its Sunday clothes. The wolf was at his door. I could see it in the slope of his shoulders, in the way he checked his phone and flinched at whatever he found there. For a moment he lingered at the counter, his hands flat on the marble. And he opened his mouth as though he meant to tell me something. My heart leaned toward him. "Tom," I said. But then Sloane's voice floated down the stairs, calling his name in that bright sing-song way of hers, and whatever he had been about to say folded up inside him like a letter slipped back into its envelope. "Never mind," he muttered. "It's nothing." He took his keys and was gone. Sloane came into the kitchen the way she came into every room, setting it to rights. She nudged a chair square to the table. She turned the handle of the coffee pot to face the same way as the cups. Butter would not have melted in her mouth. "I had the loveliest talk with the lawyer yesterday," she said, setting a plate in front of me. "He thinks we can have all your paperwork put to bed within the month. Won't that be a weight off your shoulders, Arthur?" She smiled. It was a beautiful smile. It never once reached her eyes. The only light left in that house was a small girl of 4. Lily was Tom's daughter from his first marriage, and her mother lay in the ground the same as mine. And Sloane wore the child the way a woman wears a coat she never asked for. She fed her and dressed her and looked straight through her as though she were a pane of glass. I would find Lily sitting alone on the bottom stair, murmuring secrets to a button she had found on the floor, and something in my chest would crack clean down the middle. Clara would have wrapped that child up in love and hymns and warm bread. Clara was not here. Neither, God forgive me, was I. Late that afternoon I went looking for Lily, and instead I found her stepmother. I stopped outside the study door because I heard Sloane's voice on the telephone, and it was not a voice I knew. The warmth had gone out of it. It had gone flat and cold and businesslike. The voice of a person counting money in the dark. "He doesn't suspect a thing," she was saying. "Another week or 2 and the old man signs the last of it. Then we are home free." I stood in the hallway with my hand pressed against the wall. Who was she speaking to? What old man? I told myself. I had misheard. I told myself the very thing Sloane kept so gently telling everyone, that grief was turning me suspicious. So I turned and walked away, and I left the question lying there in the hall like a coin I was too tired to bend down and pick up. That night, when the house had gone dark and still, I found myself standing in the doorway of the living room. I cannot tell you what drew me across the floor. Perhaps it was the look on my son's face. Perhaps it was that cold voice on the telephone. I lifted the corner of the white sheet and laid my hand flat on the closed lid. The wood was cold beneath my palm. Under it lay the keys Clara and I had bought together in a little shop in the rain. Back when we owned nothing in the world but each other and a great deal of foolish hope. Clara used to play the old hymns on this piano on Sunday afternoons. Her voice not much better than mine, but a great deal more honest. For the length of one held breath, I almost lifted the fallboard. Then I drew my hand back, let the sheet fall, and climbed the stairs to bed. I had been asleep perhaps an hour when the sound found me in the dark. A single note, middle C, round and clear, traveling up through the bones of the old house. I lay still, certain I had dreamed it. Then it came again, and after it another, and another, picked out slow and wrong and somehow wonderful, the careful searching of small hands that did not yet know where the music lived, but had decided to go looking for it anyway. My heart began to pound against my ribs. Someone had sat down at Clara's piano in the dead of night and begun, very softly, to play. It was not me. A braver man might have stayed in his bed. But I had buried my wife and sealed my music and signed away God only knew what. And there are some sounds a heart cannot ignore, no matter how tired it is grown. So I pulled on my robe, and I went down the dark stairs one slow step at a time, following that small, searching music, the way a man lost at sea follows a light he is not entirely sure he believes in. The white sheet lay crumpled on the floor like a shed skin. And there, Perched on the very edge of the piano bench in her nightgown, too small for her bare feet to reach the pedals, sat my granddaughter Lily. The moon came through the window and lay silver across the keys, and she was pressing them one at a time, her head tilted, listening hard, as though the piano were telling her a secret and she did not want to miss a single word of it. "Lily," I said softly, so as not to frighten her. "Sweetheart, what are you doing up?" She did not jump. She only looked up at me with Clara's own way of looking, calm and clear, and she said, "I couldn't sleep, Grandpa. The song wanted me to play it." I came and sat down on the bench beside her. "What song is that?" I asked. She set one small finger on a key and pressed it down. "Grandma's song," she said, as easily as if she had told me the sky was blue. I went very still. My granddaughter was 4 years old. Clara had died when this child was barely past her first birthday. A baby who could not yet walk, who had never once sat at this piano, who could not possibly remember the sound of her grandmother's voice. "Lily," I said, and I worked to keep my voice even. "Who taught you Grandma's song?" She shrugged the way children do, as though grown people ask the strangest questions. "Grandma did," she said. "She sings it to me when it's dark." And the hair stood up along my arms, because I knew in my bones that my Clara had been 3 years in the ground. And there was something else, something that turned the cold in me colder still. I knew every piece of music my wife had ever loved. I had hummed beside her in the kitchen for 31 years and turned the pages of every hymn she ever sang. But the melody rising up from under my granddaughter's small fingers was one I had never once heard in all my life. I should have been frightened. Instead, something broke open in me that had been frozen shut since the morning we lowered her down. I looked at that little girl, alone in the dark, keeping company with a song from a grandmother she could not remember. And I thought of Clara in her third pew, and of all the love she had poured out that did not simply stop because her heart had. Lily and I were the two loneliest souls under that roof, and here in the dark, the song had quietly drawn us together. "Will you show me?" I asked. And Lily took my big clumsy hand in her two small ones and set my fingers on the keys. And she pressed them down along with me, note by note, and the piano spoke. I had played for kings. I had played in halls where the silence after the final chord felt like a kind of worship. But I tell you the truth, nothing in 40 years ever sounded the way that broken little melody sounded at 2 in the morning. Played 4 hands with a child who still believed her grandmother sang to her in the dark. The tears came before I knew they were coming. They were not only for the loss of her, though God knows I had wept oceans for that. They were the tears of a man who had been certain the music in him lay buried beside his wife, and who felt it stir now, faint and stubborn, like a pulse returning beneath searching fingers. And somewhere underneath the grief, very quietly, like the first warmth after a long, hard winter, I felt something I had not felt since the day we buried Clara. I felt that the Lord had not gone quite so far away as I had spent 3 years telling myself he had. We sat there a long while, the two of us, until her head grew heavy against my arm, and I carried her up and laid her in her bed. I did not sleep again that night. For the first time in years, I did not want to. But morning came, the way it always does, and with the morning came Sloane, smiling, a single sheet of paper in her hand and a pen already uncapped. "Just one more, Arthur," she said. "Routine. The lawyer needs it today." For half a heartbeat, I remembered that cold voice on the telephone, and my hand stopped over the page. Then she laid her warm hand on my shoulder and called me dear, and told me what a comfort I was to this family. And the old fool signed. From the front window, I watched Sloane carry that paper out to the curb, where a dark car sat idling in the gray morning light. A man I had never seen climbed out to meet her. He was broad and unhurried, in an expensive coat, and he took the folder from her hand and tucked it away without so much as a glance inside. The way a man takes a thing he has already counted on. They spoke for a moment. She laughed at something he said, an easy, private laugh. The laugh of two people who share a secret. Then the man lifted his head and looked straight up at the window where I stood. And he did not look away. I stepped back behind the curtain with my heart slamming against my ribs, and I understood, far too late, that the wolf at my door had never once been hunting alone. For the first time in 3 years, I came down to breakfast humming. The music had cracked something open in me overnight, and I felt almost young with it, almost foolish. Then I saw Della standing in the kitchen doorway, with a dish towel twisted tight in her hands, and I knew before she said a word that she had been waiting up half the night to catch me alone. Della Howard had kept our house for the better part of 15 years. She had carried soup up the stairs when Clara was dying, and sat with her through the bad nights, the two of them praying together in low voices while I stood useless in the hall. She had loved that woman, and she loved the Lord. And in 15 years, I had never once known her to make a fuss over nothing. So when she said, "Mr. Bennett, I need you to sit down and hear me out," I sat. She had been dusting in Claire's old study, the little room off the hall where my wife had quietly run our whole lives. The contracts and royalties and taxes, the savings that 40 years at the piano had built into something close to $3.6 million. There was a fund in there, too, one Clara had set up before she ever got sick. Money put by for Lily, for the child's schooling and whatever future she might one day want. Clara had thought of everything. She always did. And it was in that room, Della told me, that she had seen something the night before that turned her blood to ice. There was a man with her, Della said. A lawyer. Slick fellow, fine suit. The kind of smile that makes you count your fingers after you shake his hand. Pruitt, she called him. Her voice dropped low. They had your papers spread all across Miss Clara's desk, and there was one page, Mr. Bennett, that I cannot get out of my mind. It was nothing but your signature, written over and over, dozens of times, and the hand doing the practicing was not yours. She swallowed. When I stepped in to ask if they wanted coffee, the both of them went still as cats. She slid a folder over that page quick as you please, smiled at me, and said they were only tidying up your affairs. Tidying. I have dusted that desk 1,000 times, sir. There was nothing tidy about it. I should have felt the floor drop out from under me. Somewhere deep in my chest, I think I did. But a man who has just gotten a piece of his life back does not go hunting for reasons to lose it all over again. Now I wanted it all back. The music and the family and the ordinary mornings. And I would not let an old woman's worry take a hammer to it. So I chose not to believe her. There is no easier thing in this world, and none more dangerous, than a man deciding not to see what sits right in front of him. And right then, through the kitchen window, I saw Sloane out in the garden with Lily. The child reached up for her hand, and Sloane drew it back as though those small fingers were something unclean. And her face, for one instant when she believed no one was watching, went flat and hard as a slammed door. Then Lily said something, and the warm mask slid back into place. Lily's small face fell for just a breath, the way a child's does when she has learned too young not to expect to be held. Even the baby had learned to wear a mask in that house. I saw all of it. God help me. And I looked away. Instead of thanking the one soul under that roof still loyal to me, I turned on her. I heard my own voice go cold and proud. The voice of a frightened man dressing his fear up as reason. Della, you have been under a great deal of strain. We all have. Sloane has done nothing but care for this family since the day she arrived. A page of signatures could be 100 innocent things. She started to speak. I did not let her. Grief makes people see shadows where there are none. I will thank you not to go spreading suspicion about my son's wife under my own roof. Della looked at me a long moment. She was not angry. That was the worst of it. She was only sad. The way you are sad for a man you love who is walking toward the edge of a cliff and will not hear you calling. I buried my own husband, Mr. Bennett, she said quietly. I know grief when I see it. This is not that. She folded the dish towel and set it on the counter, smoothing it flat with her palm. I loved Miss Clara. I love that little girl, and I will keep praying you open your eyes before it is too late. Then she walked out of the kitchen, and I let her go. And I told myself I had done the right thing. I would like to tell you I lay awake that night and came to my senses. I did not. I slept the sleep of a man who has chosen comfort over truth, which is the deepest and most shameful sleep there is. It was not until the next morning, when I came down to a house gone too quiet and saw Della's apron hanging untouched on its hook, that I began to understand. On the counter where she always left my coffee sat a single envelope, already opened. Inside was one typed line. Thank you for your years of faithful service. The family no longer requires your help. It was signed in a looping, confident hand, with a single name. Sloane. While I had been busy defending her, she had quietly cut away the last eyes in that house still watching out for me. And the worst of it, the part I could not yet admit, was that I had handed her the scissors myself. Word travels strangely in an old house. By the end of that first week, the whole neighborhood seemed to know that music had come back to the Bennett place. Every evening after supper, Lily and I sat at the piano, and she taught me her grandmother's song the way you might teach a stranger the road home. Patient, and a little amused at how slow I was. And here's the curious thing nobody warns you about. When a man's heart begins to beat again, his eyes begin to open too. For 3 years, grief had wrapped me in a thick gray fog. Now, note by note, the fog was lifting, and I was beginning to see the house I had been sleepwalking through. One evening, in the middle of the song, Lily stopped and looked at me with great seriousness. "Grandpa," she said, "do you want to know a secret?" I told her I did. She cupped a small hand around my ear and whispered, "Grandma keeps her treasure in the secret place. She told me not to tell, but you're allowed because you're Grandpa." I asked her, as gently as I could, where the secret place was. She only smiled, pleased with herself, and pressed a finger to her lips and went back to the keys. I let it go. I thought it was a child's game. I know now it was the most important thing anyone said to me in all those long months. And I very nearly let it slip past me. But a clearing eye sees the shadows as well as the light. With Della gone, the house had taken on a different feeling, quieter and somehow colder, like a church after everyone has gone home. I missed her more than I could say. The guilt of how I had spoken to her sat on my chest like a stone. And it was that guilt, as much as anything, that finally drove me one gray afternoon to do the thing I had been avoiding for 3 years. I went into Clara's study, and I sat down, and I began to read. The desk was just as Clara had left it, her reading glasses still folded on the blotter. I opened the drawers and made myself look at the bank statements I had been signing blind for 3 years. At first, the numbers swam in front of me. Then they came into focus, and what I saw turned my mouth to dust. Money had been moving, large sums, out of our savings, out of the royalty accounts, even out of the small fund Clara had built for Lily. All of it flowing into an account I had never heard of, under a name I did not know. And there, at the bottom of the authorization, sat my own signature, bold and certain. Except I had no memory of ever putting it there. I sat a long while with that page trembling in my hand. I am not a man who frightens easily. I have walked onto stages in front of thousands without so much as a flutter. But my hands shook holding that single sheet. Because some part of me, the part that had loved and trusted and buried its head in the sand for 3 years, understood at last what Della had been trying to tell me. This was no mistake. This was not the bank's error or an old man's confusion. Somebody had been quietly bleeding my life away, drop by drop, and signing my name to the wound. And the worst of it was the date across the top. The newest transfer had cleared only the day before. I found Sloane in the kitchen and tried to keep my voice level. I held up the statement and asked her, as evenly as I could manage, what this account was and why money was leaving Lily's fund. She did not even blink. "Oh, Arthur, that," she said with a light little laugh, sliding the page out of my hand as smoothly as a card sharp. "Pruitt set that up months ago. We moved everything into one managed account, so the family wouldn't bleed a fortune in taxes and fees. You signed off on all of it. Don't you remember? We went through it twice." But for just a moment, before the smile slid back into place, I saw something shift behind her eyes. It was quick and cold, the look of a person doing sudden arithmetic. And it told me more than any answer ever could. That evening, when I went to fetch Lily for our hour at the piano, Sloane was already guiding her up the stairs by the shoulder. "Not tonight," she said, all honey. "Papa needs his rest. All this excitement isn't good for a man your age." She said it gently, the way you speak of a sick child. But I heard it for exactly what it was. The music had woken me, and now that I was awake, she meant to put me back to sleep. And she would start by taking from me the one small person who had roused me. I understood then that I could not do this alone. I needed the one soul who had seen the truth before I had. The very one I had wounded for daring to speak it. I needed Della. The next morning, I drove across town to the little house where she lived, rehearsing my apology the whole way. But when I reached the curb, the windows were dark and bare, and a rental sign stood crooked in the dead grass of the yard. A neighbor watering her roses told me Della had packed up and gone 3 days back. Sudden as anything, and left no word of where. I stood on that empty porch, with my heart going down like a stone in deep water. And I understood that the wolf had done more than blind me. She had begun, very quietly, to empty the house of every last witness, one by one. I had not set foot in the Cedar Street Methodist Church in 3 years. The last time, I had sat in the front and watched them carry my wife up the aisle in a long, pale box, and I had sworn I would never go back. But a drowning man does not get to be choosy about his lifeline. Della was a church-going woman, faithful as Clara, and I could think of nowhere else to look for her. So on a cold Sunday morning, I put on my good coat and walked back up those worn front steps, and the smell of old hymnals and candle wax very nearly brought me to my knees. I had spent 3 years blaming the Almighty for taking her, and I was not certain, even then, that I had stopped. But I had run clean out of places to be proud, and a man with nowhere left to turn will find his way back to the very place he swore he had left for good. She was there, in the fellowship hall, stacking the hymnals, as though the Lord had set her in my path on purpose. When she saw me, she went still. I crossed that room feeling every one of my years, and I did the thing I should have done a week before. "Della," I said, and my voice broke on her name. "I was a proud old fool. You were right, and I am more sorry than I know how to say." For a long moment she only looked at me. Then her face softened, the way Clara's used to, and she said, "I know you are, Mr. Bennett. I have been praying you would come to your senses. Seems the good Lord was listening after all." Over weak church coffee, she told me the rest. She had not simply run off. The morning after Sloane let her go, a man she had never seen, a big fellow in an expensive coat, had come knocking at her house and told her, very politely, that it would be wise to forget what she had seen and find work in another town. He had set an envelope of cash on her table and worn a look that turned her cold. "I am no coward, Mr. Bennett," she said, "but I am an old woman living alone." And that man meant business. So I went to my sister's, 3 counties over, but I could not stay away. Not with that baby still under their roof. She lowered her eyes. "That child has gone quiet, sir. A little one knows when she is not wanted, even too small to find the words for it." There was only one man left in the world I trusted. That afternoon, Della and I drove to the office of Saul Aronson, who had been my friend and my lawyer for 30 years, and who had taken one look at Sloane years ago and tried to warn me. Saul listened to the whole sorry tale without a word, his glasses pushed up on his forehead. When I finished, he did not say, "I told you so." He was too fine a friend for that. He only let out a long, tired sigh and said, "Arthur, you stubborn old mule, let's find out what she has really done." And he picked up the telephone and started making calls. It took Saul the better part of a week to pull the threads together, calling in favors from people who owed him. What he finally laid out on his desk made my blood run cold. There was a new will. I had never seen it, never read a single word of it. Yet my signature sat at the bottom, witnessed and notarized and filed away nice and legal. It revoked everything Clara and I had drawn up together. In its place, upon my death, or upon my being declared unfit to manage my own affairs, every dollar I owned and full control of the estate would pass not to my granddaughter, the way Clara and I had always meant it to, but to Sloane. Saul took off his glasses and rubbed at his eyes. "Understand what this means, Arthur," he said. "She does not even have to wait for you to die. There is a clause here, tied to a doctor's name I have never heard of, that lets her go before a judge and have you declared incompetent. The day that petition goes through, She controls all of it. The money, the house, even where you sleep at night. They could put you away in a home, and you would have no say at all. I sat with the weight of that betrayal, certain I had finally reached the bottom of what a heart can carry. I had not, because Soul turned over the last page, and he went very quiet. And he slid it across the desk and laid his finger on a line near the bottom. There, beneath the false copy of my own hand, was a second signature. A real one. Written firm and sure, in ink I would have known anywhere. By a hand I had held back when it was small enough to fit inside my own. My son. Tom had signed it as a willing party. Not coerced, not forged. He had picked up a pen and put his name to the theft of everything his mother left behind. I heard myself say it out loud, the way a man does when his mind refuses what his eyes have plainly seen. No, there is some mistake. My son would never, Tom would never do this to me. But even as the words left me, I was staring at that signature, and I knew his hand the way I knew my own face in the glass. There was no mistake. The boy I had taught to ride a bicycle, the young man I had walked down the aisle to give away, had sat in a room with that woman and that crooked lawyer, and he had signed me away. And God forgive me, in that moment, I could not have told you which burned hotter in my chest, the grief or the rage. For 2 days I carried that rage around inside me like a hot coal, and it would have been the easiest thing in the world to let it burn. But Clara's voice kept stopping me. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. And underneath the verse, something simpler still. That boy was my son. So on the third night, when the house had gone quiet and I saw the light come on in the garage where Tom went to be alone, I set my anger down as best I could, and I went out to him as a father, not a judge. He was sitting on an overturned crate with a bottle beside him, staring at nothing. And when he heard my step, he flinched like a man caught in the act. "Dad, it's late. You should be in bed." I did not answer that. I pulled up a stool and sat down across from my son, close enough to see how thin he had grown, how worry had carved hard lines into a face that used to laugh so easily. "Tom," I said quietly, "I know about the will. I have seen your name on it, in your own hand. I am not here to shout. I am here because I want you to tell me, man to man, how it came to this." For a long moment he said nothing. Then his shoulders began to shake, and my proud, grown son put his face in his hands. "I never meant for it to go this far, Dad. I swear to God I didn't." It came out of him in pieces then, the way the truth does when a man has held it too long. The business had failed. He had borrowed money to keep it breathing, then borrowed more to cover the first. From the kind of people you do not borrow from twice. There was a man named Victor, he said, who held his markers and was not the patient sort. Tom had lain awake every night for a year, sick with the thought of what such men do to a man who cannot pay. "I was going to lose everything," he said. "The house, Lily, and then Sloane told me she had a way to fix it all. She said no one would get hurt. She said you were half gone already, that it was kinder this way. And once I signed that first paper, Dad, I belonged to her. She made that plain. She said if I ever breathed a word, she would see that Victor came collecting, and that I would lose Lily for good, one way or another. She smiles when she says these things. That is the worst of it. She smiles. It is a strange thing to feel your heart break and harden in the very same breath. Part of me wanted to take him by the collar, but the larger part, the father part, only ached. "Son," I said, "look at me. Whatever you owe, whatever trouble you are in, we face it together, you and me. Do you remember when you were 9 and you put a baseball through Mr. Hadley's window and hid in the tool shed half the afternoon? Too scared to come out, I found you. We fixed that window together, you and I, and the world did not end. This is no different, son. It is only bigger. That is what your mother would have wanted. Not this. Never this." I reached across and laid my hand on his arm. "It is not too late to do the right thing. Help me set it right, and I will stand between you and the whole world if I have to." And for one trembling moment, I saw it work. I saw the boy I had raised come back into his eyes. He looked at me, and he nodded, barely, and he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. "There's something you need to see," he whispered. "She doesn't know I kept it. It's all in here. What they're really planning. The accounts. The man she works with." His hand shook as he drew out a folded envelope. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I'll help you. I'll testify if it comes to that." My heart leapt. For the first time in weeks, I let myself believe the worst was behind us. That my son and I would walk out of that garage together and set the whole crooked business right. And then I sensed her before I saw her. I turned, and Sloane was standing just inside the garage, calm as still water, as though she had been listening the whole while. Perhaps she had. "Tom, honey," she said sweetly, "come back to bed. You'll wake the baby." But her eyes were fixed on that envelope in his hand, and her voice, underneath all the sugar, had gone to ice. "You remember what we talked about? About Lily? About what happens to every one of us if you do something foolish now?" That was all. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. I watched the courage drain from my son's face like water from a cracked glass. And I knew, before he moved, that I had already lost him. I watched my boy fight it. I will give him that much. To my dying day. For one more breath he held that envelope, and his jaw worked, and I prayed, I truly prayed, that the love in him would prove stronger than the fear. But Sloane had measured him correctly, the way she measured everyone she used. Slowly, Tom slid the envelope back into his pocket. He would not look at me. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said, his voice hardly more than a breath. "Just sign the papers. Please. Let it all be over." Then he rose and walked past me into the house, and left me alone in that cold garage with the bottle and the quiet and the unbearable knowledge that my own son had chosen his fear over his father. The crack in him had shown me there was still a good man somewhere inside. The fear had shown me he was not yet brave enough to be him. Saul had told me to wait. "We build this case brick by brick," he said. "We get the proof in hand, the bank records, the forged papers, all of it, before we ever let her know we're coming. Tip your hand too soon, Arthur, and a woman that clever will find a way to turn it against you. Patience wins this, not temper." It was good advice. It was exactly what Clara would have told me. The very thing my dead wife had left underlined in her Bible. "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. Wait on the Lord." But I had just watched my only son choose his fear over me in a cold garage. And there are nights when a man's grief shouts louder than his good sense. God help me. I did not wait. I came down the next afternoon to find the front room full of people, and I did not see the trap until I was standing square in the middle of it. There was Dr. Reeves, a soft-spoken man with a leather bag, whom Sloane introduced as a friend just dropping by to see how I was getting along. There were the Hadleys from next door, wearing their careful, pitying smiles. And there in the corner, with a cup of coffee balanced on his knee, sat Pruitt, the lawyer with the snake's grin. Sloane had gathered her audience. All she needed now was for me to step up and give the performance. She came to me with that gentle, worried look she had perfected, and took my arm as though I might topple over. "Dad, come sit down. Dr. Reeves only wants to ask how you've been feeling. We've all been so worried about you." And something in me, a fuse that had been burning since the garage, finally reached the powder. I pulled my arm free. "Worried about me," I said, far too loud. "You have been robbing me blind. You forged my name on a will. You have my own son, too frightened to look me in the eye. And now you bring a doctor into my house to finish the job." I could hear myself climbing higher and wilder, and some far-off part of me knew I should stop. But the words kept pouring out. 3 years of grief and a week of betrayal all at once. "You think I'm too old and broken to see exactly what you are." The instant the words left my mouth, I felt the whole room change temperature. The Hadleys traded a quick glance. Dr. Reeves set down his coffee very slowly and watched me with the patient, measuring eyes of a man arriving at a diagnosis. And I understood, far too late, exactly how I must have sounded. A wild-eyed old man with no papers in his hand, no proof, nothing but fury, shouting about forgery and plots in front of a physician and 2 neighbors. I had walked out onto her stage and spoken her lines for her. And then Sloane did the cruelest thing of all. She did not fight back. She let her eyes brim over. She turned to Dr. Reeves with the brave, breaking face of a woman at the end of her rope and said softly, "You see, this is what I have been trying to tell you. Ever since Clara passed, he gets these spells. The anger, the wild accusations. He believes we are all against him." She pressed a tissue beneath her eye. "I love this man like my own father. It is killing me to watch him slip away like this." Dr. Reeves nodded, slow and grave, and wrote something in his little book. Every word out of her mouth was a knife, and she smiled while she slid each one in. I turned to Tom. He stood by the window, gray-faced and trembling, and for one foolish moment I looked to my son to speak, to give that room the truth he had whispered to me in the garage. He met my eyes. Then he dropped them to the floor, and he said, in a voice so low it shamed us both, "Dad, please, just let them help you." And with that, the last hope in me went out like a snuffed candle. I looked around that room at the pity on every single face, and the fight drained out of me. I had handed her everything. Saul had begged me to wait, to build it brick by brick. And instead I had given Sloane the one thing she could never forge for herself. A room full of witnesses watching a grieving old man come apart at the seams at the precise moment she needed them to see it. Clara's verse came back to me then, too late to do me any good. "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." I had not left it to him. I had snatched it up in my own 2 shaking hands, and I had shot myself with it. It only got worse from there, the way these things do. Sloane, gentle and tearful and entirely in command, explained to the room that for everyone's sake, and little Lily's most of all. It would be best if Dad were not left alone with the child for the time being. I felt that one land like a fist. Lily was the reason my heart still beat at all. Lily was the one who had called me back from the dead. And in 3 soft sentences, this woman had begun to take her from me too. Then Sloane delivered the blow she had been holding back, the one she made certain the doctor was there to witness. She crossed to me and folded my cold hand inside both of hers, and looked at me with eyes full of tears, and not one drop of mercy in them. "Don't you worry about a thing, Dad," she said, loud enough for every soul in that room to hear. "I have found a wonderful place that can give you the care you need. They will look after you so well there." She squeezed my hand. Her smile was warm and gentle and meant for the room. Her eyes, locked on mine, were as cold as the grave. They did not need to lock me in. A man branded crazy in front of a doctor and his own neighbors is a prisoner, whether there are bars on the windows or not. In the days after that terrible afternoon, my whole world shrank to the 4 walls of my bedroom. Sloane kept Lily on the far side of the house, behind a babysitter she had hired for the purpose. The piano sat silent downstairs, draped once more in its white sheet, as far out of my reach as the moon. I had found my way back to the music, and now they had taken even that. Saul telephoned me every day on the line I was still permitted to keep, and every day his voice carried a little less hope in it. "I have turned over every stone I know how to turn, Arthur," he told me one evening, and I could hear how bone-tired he was. "The will is witnessed. It is notarized. The forged signatures are expert work, good enough to fool a handwriting man. And that competency petition of hers has a real doctor's name on it now. On paper, Arthur, I am sick at heart to say it, but on paper she has done everything by the book. On paper, she is your loving, worried family, and you are a confused old man who needs looking after." Then he told me the part I dreaded most. Sloane had not been idle. The hearing on her petition was set for the end of the month, only 11 days away, and the bed at the home was already reserved in my name. "I will fight it with everything I have," Saul said. "But I will not lie to you, old friend. As things stand, we are going to lose." When I set the telephone down that night, I confessed to you that I was ready to quit. I was an old man, alone, outmaneuvered at every turn by a woman half my age, and every road I tried led straight into a wall. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, and for the first time since the morning of Clara's funeral, I prayed. It was not a fine prayer. It was barely words at all. "I cannot do this, Lord," I said into the empty room. "I have made a ruin of everything. If you are there at all, you had better send me something, because I have nothing left of my own." I had spent 3 years blaming him for taking the best woman I ever knew. And now here I sat, asking that same God for help. And I did not even feel like a hypocrite. I just felt like a man at the end of himself. I did not expect an answer. In my experience, that is exactly the hour they tend to come. It came in the smallest package imaginable. A little after midnight, I heard the soft pad of bare feet, and a small shape in footed pajamas climbed up onto the end of my bed. "Grandpa," Lily whispered, "I am not supposed to be in here, but I heard you were sad." She had crept the whole length of that dark house, past a sleeping babysitter, 4 years old and not the least bit afraid, because somebody she loved was sad, and that was reason enough. She tucked herself against my side without waiting to be asked, the way she always did, and laid her head on my arm. And then, very softly, in the dark, she began to hum. It was her grandmother's song, the one no one living had taught her, the one that had cracked my frozen heart wide open on that very first night. "Lily," I murmured into her hair, "where did you really learn that song?" And she gave me the same answer she always gave, the one I had been too proud and too foolish to truly hear. "I told you. Grandpa. Grandma sings it to me. From the secret place." This time, instead of letting it drift past me like a child's daydream, I caught it and held on. "Sweetheart," I said carefully, my heart beginning to knock against my ribs. "What do you mean, the secret place? Where is it?" She yawned, already half asleep against me. "Where Grandma keeps her treasure," she said, as if it were the plainest thing in the world. "Behind the music." Something turned over in my chest then. Something that had lain dead for weeks. Behind the music. I thought of my Clara, who balanced every checkbook to the penny, who read every contract twice, who in 31 years never once left a single thing to chance. Clara, who had quietly built a fund for a granddaughter not yet born. Clara, who thought of everything. The woman I married would never, not in 1,000 years, have left the people she loved defenseless against the likes of Sloane. She would have seen it coming. She would have made ready. For 31 years that woman had stayed 3 steps ahead of trouble, and I did not believe death had broken her of the habit. If my Clara had seen this storm coming for me, then somewhere in this house, behind the music, she had left me an umbrella. I had been so lost in mourning my wife that I had forgotten the truest thing about her. My Clara always had a plan. I looked down at the child asleep in the crook of my arm. This small, overlooked, miraculous girl who had carried her grandmother's secret for years, all while the grown people around her schemed and stole and called me mad. The answer had been here the entire time, humming in the dark, waiting only for me to grow humble enough to listen. I brushed the hair back from her forehead, and when my voice came, it was not quite steady. "Lily, sweetheart, wake up just a moment for Grandpa. I need you to show me the secret place." Beyond my window, the first gray light of morning was breaking. And for the first time since they tried to bury me alive, I was not the least bit afraid of it. Children keep their treasures in strange places, and the very young do not always know the difference between a game and a lifeline. Lily led me by the hand down to the front room while the house still slept, her bare feet quiet on the stairs, and Della, who had slipped back in through the kitchen at my call, kept watch at the window for any sign of Sloane's car. The white sheet still covered the piano. Lily marched straight up to it, the way she might march up to an old friend, and patted the bench. "It's in here, Grandpa," she said, "where Grandma's music lives." I lifted the lid of the piano bench, the one Clara had used for 30 years to keep her sheet music. Inside lay her whole musical life, the hymn books and the yellowed pages, all in the order only she had ever understood. And there, at the very bottom, in a folder I had never once noticed, was a piece of music written out by hand. Her hand. I would know it anywhere. Across the top, in Clara's careful script, were 3 words that stopped the breath in my chest. "For my Lily." It was the song, the one my granddaughter had been humming in the dark for as long as I could remember. Tucked beneath the folder, Wrapped in one of Clara's silk scarves was a small wooden music box. Lily's whole face lit up. "That's it! That's where Grandma sings." My hands were not steady as I lifted the little lid. And there, thin and sweet and unmistakable, came the melody. The very song, in the tinkling voice of an old music box. Lily clapped her hands softly and pressed close to listen, entirely unsurprised, the way only a child can be unsurprised by a miracle. I understood all of it in that moment. My Clara, knowing she was dying, knowing she would never hear this child speak her name, had written a lullaby and set it inside a music box, so that her granddaughter would always have a piece of her, a grandmother who could still sing to her in the dark. Lily had found her treasure years ago and kept it as her own secret. It was the most loving thing I have ever held in my 2 hands. Behind me, Della had pressed a hand to her mouth, and there were tears standing in her eyes. "That is Miss Clara all over," she whispered, "loving on you all from the far side of the grave." I would have wept right there over that music box if Della had not touched my shoulder and reminded me gently that we did not have much time. So I made myself keep looking, and underneath where the music box had rested, pressed flat against the bottom of the bench, I found 2 more things my wife had left behind. A small brass key, the kind that opens a bank's safe deposit box, with a numbered tag tied to it by a faded ribbon. And a sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges, with a single word on the front in Clara's hand. Arthur. My fingers shook as I broke the seal. I will not share all of what my wife wrote to me that morning. Some words a man keeps for himself. But she began, "My dearest Arthur, if you are reading this, then I have gone on ahead of you, and you have finally gone looking where I always hoped you would look." She wrote that she had known for months her time was short. She wrote that she was not afraid, for she trusted the Lord to carry her the rest of the way. She wrote that her one sorrow in dying was leaving me alone with a checkbook, and that I must promise her 2 things: to let Della help me, and never to let my grief make me careless. I read that part twice. I had done the very thing she begged me not to do. And then her words changed. They grew careful and urgent, and frightened in a way my fearless Clara almost never was. She wrote about the young woman our Tom had taken up with, the one with the lovely face and the easy laugh. Sloane. Clara wrote that she had not liked what she saw. "A mother knows," she said, "when a young woman looks at her son and sees a meal ticket instead of a man." So my Clara, in the last months of her life, too weak some days to climb the stairs without resting, had quietly done some looking into Sloane's past. What she found, she did not spell out in full. She wrote only that it had frightened her badly, and that she had put the proof of it somewhere safe. Behind the lock this key would open. And then came the line, "I will carry to my own grave." Underlined twice, pressed so hard the pen had nearly torn clean through the page. "Whatever else you do, my love, do not trust that young woman's smile." I sat back on my heels on the cold floor, the letter in one hand and the little brass key in the other. And a great wave rolled over me that I can only call shame and love and a fierce new courage all braided together into one. My Clara had seen it all coming. She had tried to shield us even as she lay dying. And for 3 years, her warning had waited 6 inches beneath a music box while I slept and signed and let the wolf walk in through the front gate. But it was not too late. The letter was a map, and the key would open the rest of it. And somewhere in a bank vault across town, my wife was still fighting for me from beyond the grave. I closed my fist around that key until the teeth of it bit into my palm. "Della," I said, and even my own voice sounded different to me now. "Get your coat. We are going to the bank." I had learned my lesson in the worst way a man can learn it. Charging straight at Sloane had cost me Della her job, cost me my good name, and very nearly cost me my granddaughter. A bull does not beat the matador by being angrier. So I did the single hardest thing I have ever done, harder than walking onto any stage, harder even than burying my wife. I decided to lose. I decided to play the beaten, harmless old fool that Sloane already believed me to be, and to keep playing him until the moment was right to stop. "Wait on the Lord," Clara had underlined in her Bible. For 30 years I had read it as a comfort for the helpless. Only now did I understand it for what it truly was: a battle plan. The next morning, when Sloane came to my room with her sad eyes and her papers, I did not argue. I let my shoulders sag. I made my voice small and tired. "You're right, Sloane," I told her, and the words tasted like ashes in my mouth. "I'm not the man I used to be. Maybe this place you found is for the best. I only want what's best for Lily." She actually reached out and patted my cheek. It took everything I had not to flinch. "There's my sweet dad," she said. "I knew you'd come around and see sense." And I gave her a gentle, vacant smile, while behind it, for the first time in 3 years, I was wide awake. Every day of that act cost me a piece of my pride, and I paid it gladly, and prayed for the strength to keep paying. It worked better than I had any right to hope. A clever person has one great weakness. They cannot imagine being outsmarted by someone they have already decided is a fool. Within days, Sloane stopped watching me so closely. She left papers lying on the desk. She talked freely on the telephone with the bedroom open down the hall. She was so sure she had already won that she grew careless, and her carelessness became my freedom. Only Tom seemed uneasy. Once or twice I caught him studying me across the supper table with a puzzled frown, as though some buried part of him remembered the father who had gripped his shoulder in the garage. But he said nothing. Fear had made my son very good at saying nothing. On the third day of my little performance, while Sloane believed I was upstairs napping, Della drove me across town to meet Saul at the bank. My hand trembled as I gave the little brass key to the clerk and signed Clara's name and mine on the old register. They walked us into a quiet room, set a long metal box on the table, and left us alone with it. For a moment I could not move a muscle. Whatever waited inside that box, my wife had been the last to touch it. She had filled it with her own 2 hands, in secret, in the last frightened months of her life. As a gift to a husband she knew she would never see open it. I could not bring myself to lift the lid. So Saul did it for me. He opened the box and began to go through what lay inside, page after page, folder after folder. And I watched his old lawyer's face change as he read. The careful, guarded look he always wore fell away, and a kind of wonder took its place. And beneath the wonder, a hard, focused light I had not seen in his eyes in years. He looked up at me at last, and his voice was very quiet. "Arthur," he said, "your wife did not just have a bad feeling about that woman. She knew. She knew everything. Names, dates, account records, all of it. Laid out cleaner than I could have done it myself. Your Clara built us a case the district attorney himself would envy. Then he lifted out one folder thicker than the rest, sealed with a circle of Clara's own candle wax. On the front, in that same careful hand, she had written 2 words: "The truth." Saul did not open it. "This one," he said softly, "we save. We save this for the day that woman is sitting right across a table from you, certain she has already won." There was one more thing that happened that strange, hopeful week, though at the time I made nothing of it. A woman named Margaret Pine telephoned the house. She had arranged concerts for me long ago, when my name still meant something, and she had since become a writer, the kind who notices the things other people miss. She said she had heard that the great Arthur Bennett had fallen silent for 3 whole years, and that his silence interested her. She asked, very gently, whether I might ever consider playing again. Even once. Even for a small room of people. I told her no. I told her those days were behind me now. But after I set the telephone down, I found myself holding my own hands out in front of me, turning them over, remembering all the things they once knew how to do. But events were already moving faster than any comeback could. That very evening, flush with her own victory, Sloane gathered the household in the front room to make her grand announcement. She had spoken with Pruitt, she said. Everything was arranged. That coming Saturday, the whole family would sit down together at the lawyer's office, witnesses and all, and I would put my signature to the new will and the guardianship papers, and the whole matter would be finished once and for all. She delivered it like a queen bestowing a favor. She believed she was sealing my tomb. She had no earthly idea that she had just chosen the time and the place for her own undoing, and handed me the one thing in all the world I needed most. A single room, with every last one of them in it, and Clara's truth resting in my hands. And so we come back around to where I began this story. A glass office high above the city that once spoke my name like a prayer. A long polished table. A Saturday evening in late autumn. The lights of the city blinking on far below the tall windows. Pruitt sat at the head with his briefcase and his snake's smile. There were 2 witnesses Sloane had hired, and a notary with her little stamp, and my daughter-in-law beside me in her best dress, playing the devoted family the way she played everything, to the back row. There were 2 faces in that room Sloane had not counted on, and I had worked hard to get them there. I had told her, in my meekest voice, that an old man signing away his life's work would rest easier with his own lawyer present to see it done properly, and that he would dearly like his granddaughter close by so he could say a proper goodbye. Certain she had already won, and eager to look gracious in front of her witnesses, she allowed me both. So Saul sat at my right hand with a briefcase of his own. And in the adjoining room, minding Lily, sat Della. My wife, it turned out, was not the only one in this family who knew how to make a plan. I had spent the evening before coming, as I had spent the morning of Clara's funeral, sitting alone in her empty pew, asking the Lord for nothing but a steady hand. Alone. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I was not there for vengeance. I was there for the truth, and I had finally learned to let him carry the rest. Pruitt slid the new will across the table to me, along with the guardianship papers, and laid a heavy fountain pen on top, angled toward my hand. Sloane leaned in and patted the back of my hand, the way you pat a tired old dog. Poor Dad has had such a hard few years, she told the room in that warm, carrying voice. It is a mercy we can finally lift this weight off his shoulders. She turned those lovely, lying eyes on me. Go on, Dad. Just sign there at the bottom, and we will have you settled somewhere comfortable by tonight." I looked down at that document, the forged copy of my own signature mocking me from a dozen other pages, and I felt the old rage stir in my chest. But I had buried that rage where it belonged. This time, I was not a bull charging a cape. This time, I was a man who had read his wife's letter and knew exactly what waited in the briefcase at his feet. Everything came down to the next few minutes. My home, my name, my granddaughter's future, and the last gift Clara ever gave me, all balanced on the point of that pin. I had one chance to do this right, and I would not waste it the way I had wasted my temper weeks before. Across the table, my son could not hold still. He kept glancing at me, then at his wife. His hands knotted together. A man watching the train come on and unable to step off the tracks. "Of course, Sloane," I said softly. "Whatever you think is best." And I reached out and took the heavy pen in my hand. You could have heard a pin drop in that office. Sloane leaned forward, her lips parted, hungry for it. Pruitt had gone perfectly still. Even the hired witnesses held their breath. This was the moment every one of them had been working toward. The moment my own family had betrayed me to reach. I lowered the pen toward the line at the bottom of the page. And then, with every eye in that room fixed on my hand, I set the pen down on the table and reached instead for the briefcase at my feet. The whole room seemed to shift on its axis. Sloane's smile faltered, just for an instant, the first true crack I had ever seen run through it. "Dad," she said, and there was a new note in her voice now, a thin thread of something that had not been there a heartbeat before. "What are you doing?" I clicked the briefcase open, lifted out a single yellowed envelope, and laid it on the table beside the will, where every soul could see Clara's familiar handwriting across the front. Then I looked up, and for the first time in that whole long and terrible year, I let her see plainly that I was not the least bit confused, and not the least bit beaten, and not in any way the harmless old fool she had taken me for. Pruitt cleared his throat and reached for his most lawyerly voice. "Mr. Bennett, this is highly irregular. We are here to execute a document, not to hold a reading. Perhaps your attorney ought to remind you that this is neither the time nor the place." "My attorney," I said, never once taking my eyes off Sloane, "is the very man who told me to bring this letter." Beside me, Saul folded his hands on the table and smiled like a cat in the cream. I let the silence stretch until it was nearly unbearable. The way I once held a single rest in the middle of a sonata until an entire concert hall leaned forward in their seats. Then I spoke, and my voice came out steady and clear and carried to every corner of that room. "Before I sign anything," I said, "before anyone at this table signs anything, I believe it is only right that you all hear something first. It is a letter. My wife Clara wrote it before she died, and she addressed it to me. But I have come to believe that every single person in this room needs to hear what she had to say." I picked the envelope up off the table. Across from me, Sloane had gone very pale. And there, somewhere behind that perfect, frozen smile, I watched the woman who had stolen my life at last begin to be afraid. I have stood before audiences of thousands and never once let my hands shake. But when I unfolded my wife's letter in that silent room and began to read her words aloud, my voice broke on the very first line, and I had to stop and gather myself before I could go on. There is something about hearing the voice of the dead come out of your own mouth. Clara was 3 years gone, And yet there she sat at that table with us, speaking to every soul in the room, as clear and as sharp and as loving as the day she put down the pen. She had written it in the calm, steady hand of a woman who had made her peace with God and had only her family left to worry over. I read them the part where she said she had known her time was short and had spent her last strength not on herself, but on guarding the family she would leave behind. I read them her warning, the very one I had been 3 years too late to heed, about the young woman with the lovely face and the easy laugh. And then I read the line that turned the whole room to stone. I have done some quiet looking into Sloane's past, my love, and what I found frightened me to my very soul. So I have taken steps. There is a true will, the only one that counts, locked away where she will never think to look, and proof enough to put her away beside it. When I lowered that letter, the silence in the room had changed its whole character. The 2 hired witnesses were staring at Sloane now, not at me. The notary had quietly set down her stamp, and Sloane, my poised and perfect daughter-in-law, had 2 spots of color burning high on her cheeks and a new stillness about her. The stillness of a creature that has just heard a trap snap, snap shut somewhere in the dark. Beside her, my son had put his face in his hands, hearing his dead mother's voice name his wife for exactly what she was, had broken something in him that all my pleading in the garage never could. That was Saul's moment, and my old friend rose to meet it. He opened his own briefcase and laid 2 documents on the table beside the forgery. The first was Clara's true last will and testament, signed and witnessed and dated a full 2 months before she died, leaving everything exactly as she had always intended, in trust for Lily, with not 1 red cent for Sloane. The second was a report from a handwriting examiner Saul had hired, a man who had testified in courtrooms for 30 years. His finding could not have been plainer. The signature on Pruitt's will was a forgery, a skilled one, but a forgery all the same. Then Saul laid his finger on a clause near the end of Clara's true will. My wife had thought of even this. Written there in plain language was a provision that any later will moving my estate outside the family trust was to be presumed the work of fraud and void on its face. Clara did not merely leave a will, Saul said quietly. She left a trap, and she built it to spring the day a thief reached for what was never hers. Pruitt shot up out of his chair. "This is absurd," he sputtered, though the smoothness had drained clean out of his voice. "These documents have not been authenticated. I will not sit here while my client is slandered by some old letter and a hired hack." But the 2 witnesses were already edging toward the way out, and the notary was gathering up her things. Because honest people can smell a sinking ship, and not a one of them wanted to be standing on deck when the law came asking its questions. The will that was meant to bury me lay dead on the table, and everybody in that room knew it. I should have felt triumphant. For 1 breath, I did. And then Sloane began, very quietly, to laugh. It was not a pleasant sound. She lifted her chin, and the warm mask was gone from her face entirely now, and what looked out at me from behind it was something cold and clever and utterly unafraid. She was not panicking. She did not panic. She simply rearranged the board in her mind and reached for the 1 piece she had left. "Well played, Arthur," she said. "Truly, the old man had some fight left in him after all. But before you go congratulating yourself, let me remind you of one small thing. That forged will you were so proud of tearing up? My husband signed it too. Willingly. With his own hand. in front of these very witnesses. Tom is no victim here. In the eyes of the law, your precious son is my accomplice. The triumph turned to ash in my mouth. Because she was right. And we both knew that she was right. Tom had signed that document of his own free will. If I took this to the police, if I handed Saul's evidence to a prosecutor and brought the whole rotten business crashing down on her head, my son would go down in the wreckage right beside her. I would save my home, and Clara's legacy, and Lily's whole future. And I would do it by sending my own boy to prison. For all of Clara's careful planning, my dead wife could never have foreseen that her own son would put himself on the wrong side of the law. The trap she set for a thief had closed on her own boy as well. Sloane watched the understanding break across my face, and slowly, terribly, she smiled again. "There it is," she said, very soft now. "So you tell me, Arthur, which is it to be? You can save your fortune, or you can save your son. But I promise you, with everything I am, you cannot do both." For a moment, Sloane's question hung in the air of that room like smoke, and she watched me twist on the hook of it, certain she had me. Save your fortune or save your son. She believed it was checkmate. What she did not know was that I had not come to that meeting with only one card to play. I looked across the table at Saul, and Saul gave me a small nod. And he reached into his briefcase one more time. "Before anyone in this room decides anything," Saul said, "I believe you all deserve to know exactly who it is you are dealing with. You heard the name Margaret Pine when she telephoned me last week about a concert," I said to the room. "What you did not hear is that Margaret spent 30 years as an investigative reporter before she ever organized a recital, and that when she grew curious about why a man like me had gone silent for so long, she began pulling on threads. Those threads led somewhere very dark." Saul opened a thick folder and started laying photographs and documents across the table, one after another, the way a man deals out cards. "This woman," he said quietly, "is not who she claims to be. She is not, in point of fact, even named Sloane." The woman sitting among us under that name had used 4 other names that Margaret could find, in 4 other states. The story was the same every single time. She would find a family with some money and an aging parent, a widow or a widower, lonely and grieving and easy to comfort. She would marry her way in, or befriend her way in, and within a year or 2, the old person would be declared unfit, or would quietly die, and the money would vanish, and she would vanish along with it. Arthur Bennett was not her first widower. I was only the latest in a long line of grieving old fools she had picked clean and left for ruin. But it was not the folder that broke that room. It was the telephone. Saul had arranged the call, and when he set the phone on the table and pressed the button, a frail and trembling voice came out of the little speaker into the silence. It belonged to a woman named Eleanor, 81 years old, calling from a state 2,000 miles away. 3 years ago, she said, a lovely young woman had married her son and charmed them all. And within the year, Eleanor had lost her home, her savings, and very nearly her grip on her own mind, before a soul would believe her. "Is she there with you?" the old voice asked, thin and shaking. "Is the wolf in the room right now? Because if she is, then God help you. Do not let her smile at you. Whatever you do, do not let her smile." And Saul was still not finished. He laid down one last photograph, a grainy surveillance picture of Sloane in a parking lot, leaning into the window of a dark car, speaking with a broad man in an expensive coat. I knew that car. I had watched it idle at my own curb. "She has never once worked alone," Saul said. "In every case there is a partner, a money man who scouts the marks, fronts the cash, and cleans up whatever is left behind. The same man who frightened Della out of her home. The same man who has been holding your son's debts over his head like a hammer. His name is Victor." Through all of it, I had not been watching Sloane. I had been watching my son. And I saw the very moment it broke him. Tom had told himself, I think, that whatever else was true, at least his wife had loved him. That he had been weak, but not a complete fool. Now he sat and listened to the proof that his whole marriage had been a hunt. That Sloane had chosen him the way an angler chooses a hook. That the very debts which drove him into her arms had been arranged by her own partner. "It was never real," Tom said to no one, his voice gone hollow. "None of it. You never loved me at all." He looked at the woman he had married as though he had never once laid eyes on her before. He had given this woman his trust, his name, his daughter's home, and a piece of his soul. And to her, he had been nothing but a way in to his father's money. I am not sure I have ever watched a heart break more completely than my son's broke in that chair. Any ordinary person, stripped bare like that, in a room full of witnesses, would have crumbled. Sloane was not an ordinary person. She did not deny a word of it. She did not weep or protest or call us liars. She only sat there and let the whole truth of herself settle over the room, watching us with the patient, unblinking calm of a thing that has been cornered many times before and has always found its way out. Then I watched her run the cold arithmetic one final time, set aside her dead marriage and her ruined name as easily as a gambler folding a bad hand, and reach for the only leverage she had left in the world. She turned to my broken son, and when she spoke, there was not one trace of warmth or fear or shame left in her voice. There was only the flat, hard command of a cornered predator that has decided to bite its way free. "Tom, look at me. You were going to tell these people that your father coerced you, that the old man bullied you into signing, that he has been unstable for years, and that you signed only to protect him from himself. You are going to say it, and you are going to say it now, because if you do not, I will see to it that you and I go down together, and that your precious Lily grows up with both her parents behind bars." And so, in the end, it all came down to my son. Every eye in that room turned to Tom, and the silence that fell was the heaviest I have ever known. Heavier than any concert hall holding its breath for the first note. One word from him, the truth, would end the whole thing. The forgery stood exposed. The predator had been named, and her partner along with her. All that remained undone in the world was for one frightened man to stand up and tell the truth about his own wife. Watching him, I understood that my son held the whole of our future in his trembling hands. And I understood that he knew it too. I did not pressure him. The Lord knows I wanted to. But I had learned, too late and at far too high a price, that you cannot bully a man into courage. So instead, I leaned across the table, and I caught my son's eye, and I spoke to him the way I had spoken to him when he was small and afraid of the dark. "Tom," I said gently, "son, look at me, not at her. Your mother is in this room right now. She is in that letter. And she is in that little girl in the next room. And she is watching you this very minute. You are not the man who signed those papers. I know you are not. Be the man she raised you to be. Tell the truth, and whatever comes after, we will face it together. You and me. I am still your father. There is nothing you have done, nothing in this whole world, too big or too dark for the two of us to carry between us. And for one breathless moment, I watched my boy rise to it. His eyes filled, his jaw firmed. He looked at me, and he looked at the letter lying there in his mother's hand, and he drew a long, shaking breath, like a man about to step off a high ledge into the dark. He opened his mouth. He was going to do it. I have never in all my life wanted anything the way I wanted in that one instant for my son to be brave. But Sloane had been hunting frightened people for a very long time, and she knew the precise moment to strike. Before Tom could force a single word out, she spoke, soft and almost tender. And what she said was the cruelest thing I heard in that whole terrible business. "Think very carefully, Tom," she murmured, "because the second you open your mouth, I make one phone call, and Victor tells the court about that night 2 years ago. The one you have never told your father about. And then you do not simply go to prison. You lose Lily. Forever. They will never let a man like you near that child again. So tell me, is your pride truly worth your daughter?" I did not know what night she meant. To this very day I do not know. Whatever my son had done, whatever shadow Victor held over him, he had carried it entirely alone, too ashamed to bring it to his own father. And that, perhaps, was the saddest discovery in all of it. That somewhere along the road, my boy had stopped believing I would help him. I watched the courage go out of my son like a candle in a draught. It was not a violent thing. That is the part that haunts me to this day. There was no struggle, no shout, no flood of tears. There was only a small and terrible slumping of his shoulders, the surrender of a man who has weighed his own soul against his child and his freedom, and found that he is simply not strong enough to pay what it costs. He closed his mouth. He lowered his eyes to the grain of the table. And in that one quiet, ordinary motion, I lost my son. When Tom finally spoke, his voice came out flat and dead. The voice of a man reading words that someone else had written for him. He would not look at me. He could not. "It is true," he said to the room. "What my wife says is true. My father has not been himself for years. Not since my mother died. He gets confused, and he gets angry. He pressured me into signing. I only did it to protect him." Each word landed on me like a separate blow. My own son, the boy I had taught to ride a bicycle, sat in a room full of strangers and called his father a madman in order to save himself. Across the table, even Saul, who had seen every low thing people do to one another in 40 years of practicing law, looked away. When he had finished, Tom at last lifted his head and looked at me, and his eyes held a grief and a shame so deep that I knew the truth even then. He knew exactly what he had done. He would carry it to his grave. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered. And those 3 small words were the last my son ever spoke to me as my son. Because something happened in me in that moment, something quiet and final. I looked at the man across that table, and for the first time in 33 years, I did not see my boy. I saw a stranger who happened to be wearing his face. I felt no rage. I felt no hatred. I felt only the vast and hollow grief of a father who has, in every way that truly matters, just buried his only child. Clara had been spared this much, at least. She had not lived to watch her son choose his own fear over his father. And I found, in the wreckage of that moment, that I was glad she was not there to see it. And then, very slowly, I wiped my eyes. And I rose to my feet, and I reached one last time into my coat, for the thing I had been praying with all my heart I would not need. My hand was already inside my coat, closing around the last thing Clara had left me, when a small voice spoke from the edge of the room and stopped the whole world cold. "Grandpa, why is everybody being mean to you?" Every head in that office turned at once. There, standing on the threshold in her stocking feet, having slipped away from Della to come find me, stood Lily, 4 years old, clutching her grandmother's music box tight against her chest. And in the silence that followed, I understood that the last card I had been about to play was not the one the Lord had in mind. She had heard the raised voices through the wall, and a child of 4 does not understand lawyers or wills or guardianship papers. She understood only that a room full of grown people was being unkind to her grandpa, the one soul in that whole cold house who had ever truly listened to her. And she had come to set it right, the only way she knew how. She crossed the room and laid her small hand on my knee and turned to face them all. My fierce little defender. And what came out of her mouth next, no lawyer on this earth could have coached, and no judge alive could have doubted. "Grandpa isn't sick," she said, lifting her chin at the row of witnesses. "He plays the piano with me every single night. He knows all the songs." Then she frowned, the way children do when they are working something out, and she pointed one small finger straight at Sloane. "But Mama Sloane tells fibs. I saw her. She was writing Grandpa's name over and over on the papers, lots and lots of times. And the man with the shiny suitcase showed her how to make it look right. And she said a bad thing on the telephone. She said that when they put Grandpa in the sleepy place, we get all his money. And then we go far away and leave my daddy behind." You could feel the truth of it settle over that room like a verdict read aloud. The hired witnesses were staring at Sloane now in open horror. The notary had pressed a hand to her mouth. There is no cross-examining a little girl who is simply telling you what she saw with her own eyes. There is no twisting it, no calling it grief or paranoia or the ravings of a confused old man. Out of the mouth of that child came the one testimony in all the world that Sloane could not touch, could not threaten, and could not buy. And she knew it. I looked at the overlooked child and understood that Clara had foreseen even this. The least of them had become the whole of my rescue, nor was Lily the only one. Della had hurried in close behind her, and she stepped forward now with her chin held high. "Every word that baby said is the gospel truth," she told the room. "I saw those practice pages with my own eyes. That is the very reason they threw me out of this house." And that, in the end, was the thing that finally broke her. Not Saul's evidence, not Clara's letter, not the photographs of Victor. A child. Sloane came up out of her chair, and this time the beautiful mask did not merely slip. It tore clean away. And the thing that looked out from underneath it was so cold and so ugly that the whole room drew back from her. "You poisonous little brat," she hissed at my granddaughter. And there was nothing human left in her voice at all. I should have been rid of you the day I married into this pathetic little family." The words were out before she could swallow them. There in front of the witnesses, the notary, her own lawyer, in trying to frighten a 4-year-old into silence. Sloane had finally, and fatally, told the whole truth about herself. Into the stunned hush, I drew out at last the thing I had been holding back. The thick folder sealed with a circle of Clara's candle wax, and I laid it on the table. "My wife did not merely suspect this woman," I said quietly. "For the last 6 months of her life, while the cancer was taking her, Clara wrote it all down. The dates, the conversations, the lies, the names, the whole plan. She saw every bit of it coming, and she recorded every bit of it, and she trusted that one day the truth would find its way into the light." I laid my hand flat on that folder, my Clara's last and most faithful work. And she was right. It only took a dead woman, a loyal friend, and the plain honesty of a little child to carry it there. What came after happened fast, the way a dam lets go all at once after holding for years. Saul had not come to that meeting alone. The 2 quiet men who had been waiting out in the lobby stepped in now, and they were no witnesses. They were officers of the court, and they had heard every word through the open doorway. Between Clara's diary, a room full of stunned witnesses, and a confession Sloane had screamed at a child, they had more than enough. They took Victor first, caught flat-footed beside the dark car in the lot below. Then they came for her. Sloane did not go quietly. As they led her out, she turned back to me one last time, her lovely face twisted into something I expect to see in my nightmares until the day I die. And she swore to me, low and venomous, that this was not finished. Tom never raised his head as they led her past. He had sold his father for a lie that had just shattered in plain view. And that grief settled in beside my relief, where it would stay the rest of my days. But she was wrong. Behind her, my granddaughter slipped her small, warm hand into mine. And I knew, the way you know the sun has finally come up, that it was over. Truly, completely over. The office was quiet now. The hired witnesses were gone. The officers were gone. And the late sun laid long gold bars across the very table where, an hour before, they had meant to strip me of everything. Saul slid a single sheet in front of me and set down a pen. I picked it up and knew it at once. It was Pruitt's pen. That heavy silver one Sloane had pushed at me a dozen times, bought to sign my whole life away. Now it lay in my own hand. And for the first time in 3 years, I knew exactly what I meant to write. Saul had worked the phones for an hour and been magnificent. The forged will was waste paper, dead the moment Clara's true one came out of that safe deposit box. And the petition to declare me incompetent had collapsed along with the woman who filed it. Every dollar Sloane had bled from my accounts would be chased back through the courts. What could be found? The $3.5 million Clara and I had built across a lifetime. The money they had circled like crows was safe. It was mine again, and I no longer cared for it the way a frightened man does. It was not treasure anymore. It was a tool. And at last, it had come back to the right hands. So I bent over the new will Saul had drawn from Clara's own instructions. And I signed my name, slowly and clearly, in my own hand, with no one standing over my shoulder. I gave the larger part to a trust, locked where no smiling stranger could ever reach it again, with a single purpose at its heart. It would build what Clara had dreamed of for years and I had been too proud to give her. A music foundation in her name to put pianos and lessons in the hands of children who could never afford them otherwise. And all that remained, every brick of the house, I placed in a second trust for one small girl, the way Clara had tried 2 years ago, before they emptied it. This time, no living hand would touch it. When I had finished, I watched the ink dry and thought about the long, crooked road that had brought me there. They had put this pen in my hand to commit a theft. I had used it instead to build a thing that would outlive us all. There is a verse my Clara loved, that vengeance belongs to the Lord and not to us, and for the longest time I had not understood it. I had wanted, God forgive me, to make those people suffer as they had made me suffer. But I understood it now. The Lord had seen to the vengeance himself, in his own time, and left me free to do the only thing that would ever matter. He had left me free to build. One piece of business was left, and it was the hardest of all. Tom was waiting out in the hall. The law would deal with him in time for the lie he had sworn under oath, and Saul believed it would go gentler on him than he deserved. A pawn as much as a player. But the harder reckoning was not the law's. When he came in, he could not meet my eyes, and he stood there like a boy called to the principal's office. This grown man who had helped bury his own father alive. There is a paper here for you to sign too, Tom. I said, my voice did not shake. I had no shaking left in me. You are signing over the care of your daughter. Lily comes to live with me now. She will be raised in a house where nobody practices another man's signature in the dark, and nobody teaches her that family is a thing you sell off when you get frightened. He signed. What else could he do? And when he handed the pen back, his eyes brimming, he opened his mouth to say something, some apology, some plea. I will never know which, and I could not bear it. Don't, I said gently, and that was the cruelest kindness I have ever given. I am not even angry at you, son. That is the part you will never understand. I am simply finished. You are still my boy. You will always be my boy. But the man I trusted, the man your mother and I raised, is gone, and I do not know the one standing in front of me. Go on home. Get right with God, if you can. But somewhere, I cannot watch. And I watched my only child walk out of my life. For a long moment after the hall swallowed him, I could not move. Then a warm, work-worn hand came to rest on my shoulder. Della had not left my side through any of it. You did right by that baby girl, Mr. Bennett, she said softly. And by Miss Clara, too. She would be proud of you today, prouder than I can say. I laid my hand over hers, this woman I had once wrongly turned out of my home, who came back anyway and stood by me when my own blood would not. I would have lost everything without you, Della. I told her, and the Lord knows I meant it. Saul gathered the papers, and the slow machinery of the law began to grind toward justice. It was finished. The fortune was safe. The wolf was caged. The child was mine to protect. And the legacy Clara had dreamed of would stand long after I lay in the ground beside her. I capped that silver pen, the one forged to ruin me, and laid it down for the last time. Then I lifted my eyes toward the one thing I had not yet found the courage to touch. Across town, in a house that was mine again, a grand piano stood sleeping under a gray sheet, as it had slept for 3 long, silent years. I got to my feet. It was time, at last, to go home and wake it. The house lights went down, and a hush fell over a concert hall I had not set foot on in more years than I cared to count. I walked out onto that stage, alone, an old man in a borrowed tuxedo, and sat down at a gleaming black grand piano with my heart going like a hammer against my ribs. For 3 long years, I had not played a single note. For 3 long years, the music in me had lain under a gray sheet, the way grief lays its sheet over everything it touches. And then I lifted my hands, and I let them fall. And at long last, the silence broke. It was a benefit. The very first concert held to raise money for the Clara Bennett Music Foundation. And Margaret Pine had moved heaven and earth to fill every last seat in the place. I played the pieces my wife had loved the best, the ones she used to hum in our kitchen with flour on her hands. And somewhere in the middle of them, I stopped being afraid. The notes came back to me like old friends who had only been waiting, patient and forgiving, for me to find my way home to them. When I finished, the whole hall rose to its feet. But that was not the moment I will remember. The moment I will carry with me to the end came last, because then I reached down, and I lifted a small girl up onto the bench beside me, and Lily settled in against my side as though she had been born to that very spot. She laid her little hands on the keys, and she looked up at me, and she smiled. And together, the two of us played the song, her grandmother's song, the lullaby that no living soul had ever taught her, the one that had drifted back into our silent house like the first warm wind of spring and woken a dead man's heart. We played it slow and we played it true, and I swear to you, somewhere inside that music, Clara was in the room with us. I felt my wife in the warmth of that little body leaning into mine, in the sureness of those small fingers finding notes I had never had to teach them. Whatever else this life had taken from me, it had handed me back this. I would be lying to you if I said it was a perfect ending. Life does not hand us those, and any storyteller who tells you otherwise is selling something. I had won. The wolf was caged. The fortune was safe. The legacy would outlive me, and the child was mine to raise and to love. But I had not won everything. There were 2 empty places at the very heart of my victory that all the justice in the world could never fill. One was a woman who was never coming back to me, and the other was a son, alive somewhere out there in the world, whose name I could no longer bear to speak aloud, and whose chair at my table would stay empty for the rest of my days. I had learned, in the hardest way a man can learn it, that some prices can never be paid back, only carried. The next morning, before the sun was fully up, I drove out to the cemetery alone. The grass was wet and silver with dew, and I stood a long while at Clara's stone with my hat in my hands. I told her it was done. I told her about the foundation, and about the concert, and about how our granddaughter had played her song for 1,000 strangers and made grown men weep. I told her she had been right about everything. Right to be afraid. Right to write it all down. Right to trust that the truth would keep until someone was ready to carry it. And then I told her the thing I had driven all that way to say. I told her I was sorry it had taken me so long to wake up. And I thanked her, with everything left in me, for saving us all from the grave. If you take one single thing from an old man's story, let it be this. They came for everything I had. They came for my money and my home and my name and even my own mind. And for a while, God help me, I let them take it. because grief had convinced me there was nothing left worth fighting for. But there was one thing they could never reach, no matter how cleverly they schemed, because it had never been written on any paper they could forge. It was the love between a husband and a wife that outlived the grave. It was a grandmother's song, handed down to a child who never once met her. It was the music. The music in a human heart is the one inheritance no thief on this earth will ever have the power to steal. I am an old man now, and I do not have so very many years left in this world. But I am not afraid of them anymore. I have made my peace with God for all the time I wasted, and I thank God every single morning for the small hands that wake me, and for the song the two of us play while the coffee brews. And when my own time comes at last, I believe with all my heart that God will let me hear that music waiting on the other side, in a kitchen full of warm light, with my Clara humming softly along. So if you are out there listening to this, and there is someone you love sitting in the very next room, do not wait the long way I waited. Go to them now and tell them. And if this story has touched something in your own heart tonight, then stay here with us a while. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and tell me your own story down below. Because every last one of us is carrying a song that still deserves to be heard.